Welcome to Humble Beginnings, the Undrafted podcast. I'm your host, Rochelle Hamilton Jr. Thank you to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for blessing me with the gifts, talents, and resources to do this podcast. Thank you for taking time out of your day to tune in. We got a great one for you today on the Undrafted podcast. We're talking about the AFC North, the rough, tough, and gritty AFC North. The AFC North is an interesting division. It had the biggest disparity between any division in the NFL in 2017. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they tied for a league best record while the Cleveland Browns went winless. Then you had the Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals somewhere in between. To me, this division is a toss-up because any one of these four squads can take the division crown this year. Yes, you heard me right, and I'll explain myself a little bit later. Well, let's get to it. Episode 14 of the Undrafted podcast begins now. Let's get it! Getting right into it on today's episode of the Undrafted podcast, we visit the AFC North. The AFC North is an interesting division. It's not the flashiest of divisions, but it's definitely a rough and tough one. Pittsburgh's won the division 3 out of the last 4 years. This has been a division that has been home to players like Ray Lewis, Jerome Bettis, Bart Scott, Troy Polamalu, Joe Thomas, Bernie Kosar, Corey Dillon, the ever-colorful Chad Ochocinco, and the list could go on and on and on with the names of Hall of Fame players and all-star players that have called the AFC North home at one point in their career. Pittsburgh leads the division in the number of overall titles with 22. The AFC North had the biggest disparity of any division in the NFL last year. The Steelers finished tied for a league best 13-3 record, while the Cleveland Browns didn't win a single game. The Baltimore Ravens, they come in at 9-7, and the Bengals finished 7-9. This is an interesting division because if you look at the AFC North on paper, you would almost be tempted to call it an average division just for the simple fact that there's no clear-cut favorite in this division, and it's really a toss-up between these four squads. And I'll tell you my reasons why I feel that way as we get further into the podcast. That's also something that could be the most exciting part about the AFC North is as a division, there's no clear-cut winner, and any one of these four teams could come out and take this division. First squad up in the AFC North is the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Cincinnati Bengals, they went 7-9. In 2017, they finished third in the AFC North for the 2017 season. The biggest question, or I guess the biggest storyline that you could say for the Cincinnati Bengals is there a such thing as a hot seat in Cincinnati? I mean, seriously, Marvin Lewis has been a statue basically since 2003. And the hot seat might only exist in fans' minds. But this is a coach who in 14 years or 14 seasons, going on 15 seasons, is winless in the playoffs. He's got an 0-7 postseason record, and that's a record that cannot be easily shaken. Now, Marvin Lewis seems like a great person, seems like a great guy. He was the architect of the historical 2000 Baltimore Ravens defense, one of the best defenses in NFL history, bar none. So the dude obviously knows football, but, you know, it's like that saying that goes, you know, there are some men who are just created to be a forever coordinator type of guy. And being a coordinator, whether you're offensive or defensive, being a coordinator in the NFL is not, you know, like a badge of shame. I mean, there's only 32 defensive coordinators in the National Football League and 32 offensive coordinators in the National Football League in a world of, 6 or 7 billion people. So, I mean, it's not like a badge of shame to say you're just a guy who's better suited to be a coordinator. Not ashamed to say that. You know, the Cincinnati Bengals are basically telling their fans they don't care what they think because most teams, the other 31 teams in the National Football League, would have gotten rid of Marvin Lewis by now. Because in coaching, every coach knows that you're hired to be fired at some point, basically, especially at the NFL level. So I'm not really sure what the Cincinnati Bengals see in Marvin Lewis. Like I say, he seems like a great person, he seems like a great guy, but he's not getting it done. And it's funny because the one time somebody tried to separate Marvin Lewis from this job, it was Marvin Lewis. He basically quit after the season, and for some reason, I don't know why, some way, somehow, Cincinnati managed to talk him into coming back. I remember when Marvin Lewis sent out that statement basically separating himself from the organization. And I remember telling one of my friends, Marvin Lewis is going to be the Cincinnati Bengals coach in 2018. And lo and behold, it actually happened. So for me, that's a big storyline or question mark for the Cincinnati Bengals coming into 2018. Is Marvin Lewis finally going to break this playoff victory drought? Because getting to the playoffs is not good enough in the NFL. It's just like in life. When you're on a job, it's not good enough for you just to, do your job. They want you to go above and beyond, or at least show that you're growing and progressing and getting better, especially in a performance-based job like the National Football League. I mean, it's just like on a TV show. If you're a host of a TV show and the ratings are good, well, the bosses, they might be satisfied with good, but no boss out there, no TV boss out there, or radio boss out there is not going to push you to try to grow your audience, grow your show, progress your show. Whatever your job is, no good entertainment boss is going to tell you not to grow, not to progress. No good boss is going to reward that. Because eventually, if you won't do what they're asking you to do and grow and progress, then you're going to be out of a job. There's no shortage of people who want your job. There's no shortage of men who want to be an NFL head coach. So me personally, from that standpoint, I don't get it, but apparently Mike Brown and the Cincinnati Bengals executives, they see something in Marvin Lewis that pretty much nobody else is seeing. Even Marvin Lewis doesn't see it. He tried to walk away and, anyway. Now, before 2017, Marvin Lewis had never fired a coordinator in season. Well, he fires offensive coordinator Ken Zampese after week 2, after the Bengals only scored 9 points and no touchdowns through the first 2 games. They bring in Bill Lazor to take his place. And the Bengals offense didn't progress the way they wanted it to under Bill Lazor, but they were able to beat 2 teams who were playoff bound or playoff contenders last season. They beat the Detroit Lions in Week 16. Then they beat the Ravens in that crazy Week 17 game where they beat the Ravens at the last second, literally. That's the game that sent Buffalo to the playoffs for the first time in 17 years. Then, when you see offensive coordinators get fired in season, NFL teams generally don't even do that. So for a coordinator to get fired in the season tells you that there's a lot more going wrong than what the public sees, because when it comes to coaching and getting rid of coaches, NFL teams, they don't like replacing coaches in the season. Teams like to have their coaching staffs in place when you come into the season. So for a team to let a coach go during the season tells you that a lot of things are going wrong. Because, yes, it is on the coaches to put together the best game plan to get these dudes to come out with a victory. But also, at the end of the day, the players still have to go out and execute. The line has to go out and block. The running backs, they have to hit the right gaps to progress the ball forward. The quarterback, he's got to hit his receivers. Well, the receivers, they got to run the right routes. All these things got to go right for a team to even move the ball, for a team to score points, for a team to win games. And when those things don't go right and those things don't happen, the wheels fall off. I mean, the Broncos, they got rid of Mike McCoy in season last year, but we all saw that Mike McCoy, he was one of the problems, but he wasn't the biggest problem in Denver. So once Bill Musgrave took over for the Broncos, the offense started doing a little bit better, started getting a little more juice in it, and the rest was history. Now, they didn't win a whole lot of games, but it just kind of goes to show you that, yes, a coaching change can make a little bit of a difference, but at the end of the day, the players have still got to go and execute. So that kind of begs the question, well, is it more so coaching in Cincinnati, or is it more so the players? Me personally, I feel like it's a combination of all of that, because Marvin Lewis, he picks these guys to come into the Bengals organization. The next question that I have, as far as the Cincinnati Bengals go, is Andy Dalton. What can you expect from Andy Dalton? Because, Andy Dalton, he almost seems like a Jekyll and Hyde type of quarterback. Sometimes Andy Dalton looks like one of the good quarterbacks, one of the really good quarterbacks, like the next level down from elite, because nobody's going to confuse Andy Dalton with Drew Brees, Tom Brady, or Aaron Rodgers. Nobody's going to do that. But, there are some times in there where Andy Dalton looks like he might be on that next level below them. And then there are some times where Andy Dalton just looks like, man, what just happened with Andy Dalton? Or was it the offensive line that they had in front of Andy Dalton? Or was it a combination of all those things? Because Cincinnati's offensive line is at the bottom of the league when it comes to blocking. And, Andy Dalton was getting mashed. I mean, it's hard for a quarterback to be a good quarterback when he's constantly on his back, or he's constantly being pressured, or he's constantly being hit. So I want to see, how does Andy Dalton come back in 2018? Now, Cincinnati could easily move on from Andy Dalton with his salary after this year, because he has no guaranteed money on his contract past 2018. Now, this doesn't mean that Andy Dalton is on his way out of Cincinnati anytime soon, but it could serve as a warning shot. And historically, if you look at how the Bengals operate, especially with Marvin Lewis, that tells you that Andy Dalton ain't going nowhere no time soon. On the defensive side of the ball, the Cincinnati Bengals, Paul Guenther, he went to serve as the Raiders defensive coordinator, so he left there. they hired Terrell Austin over from Detroit to come in and serve as their defensive coordinator. Now, Terrell Austin is known for using an aggressive scheme that's good at forcing a lot of turnovers. He likes his secondary guys to really play that press man and, hit the receivers at the line, get their timing off, mess up their routes, things of that nature. So we'll see what kind of improvements that he brings for the Bengals defense in 2018. Now, before Terrell Austin came over to Cincinnati, he served as the defensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. When he took over as the DC in Detroit back in 2014, the Lions finished number 2 in overall defense. So that tells you that he has some pretty good potential. The only problem with that is history says that after that first year, his defenses take a sharp drop, because after finishing number 2 in overall defense in 2014, they came back in 2015, finished number 18 in 2015 and 2016. Then last year, after they got hit with a rash of injuries, they dropped all the way down to number 27. So it's going to be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out coming into the Cincinnati Bengals locker room. Now, the biggest hire for the Cincinnati Bengals in the offseason was they added Frank Pollock to come in and coach the offensive line. And this could be the hire that maybe, just maybe, starts to turn things around for the Cincinnati Bengals. Frank Pollock helped the Dallas Cowboys build one of the best, if not the best, offensive line in football over the last 3 years. And if you ask any other NFL team, who would they rather model their offensive line after, I guarantee you the majority of them, if not all 31 NFL teams, would say they would want to model their offensive line after the Dallas Cowboys. And I still remember when Jerry Jones spent all those high-level draft picks on the Dallas Cowboys offensive line starting back in like 2009, 2010, and a lot of people made fun of him. But now we see years later, those heavy draft investments in the line has paid off greatly for the Dallas Cowboys, and coaching has a lot to do with that. So we'll see if Frank Pollock can get that turned around, because in football, it all starts with the trenches. If you don't have a good offensive line, you ain't going to have a good team, period. And if your line can't get it done, you're going to have a long season. And Broncos fans know all too well about a Swiss cheese offensive line. So my biggest question / biggest storyline for the Cincinnati Bengals is, can they put it all together and finally break their playoff victory drought? That's what I want to know from the Cincinnati Bengals. The next squad up in the AFC North is possibly my favorite storyline of the NFL offseason of a team not named the Denver Broncos, the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns, people make fun of me when I say it, but the Cleveland Browns are turning stuff around. The Cleveland Browns are a team that a lot of people are sleeping on, but don't sleep on the Cleveland Browns, because I really like a lot of the moves that the Cleveland Browns made. Now, the Browns, they went 0-16 in 2017. They joined the 2008 Lions and the 1976 Buccaneers, a.k.a. the Yuccaneers, as the only 3 squads in NFL history to go winless. Now, the 2008 Lions and the 2017 Browns, they're the only 2 squads to go 0-16. The 1976 Buccaneers went 0-14. But this was before the NFL prolonged the regular season. The Browns are having to dig out of a whole heap of historical trouble. Before general manager John Dorsey took over, Sashi Brown, he passed on Carson Wentz and Deshaun Watson. Now, I guarantee you the Cleveland Browns as an organization are kicking themselves square in the ace for passing on those 2 cats. That's kind of like the chick who passes over you and rejects you, and then after some time goes by, she sees that you are absolute fire and your life is lit, and then it's just like she just looks from the sideline and is like, damn, I should have talked to him when he was trying to talk to me. I had my chance and I blew it. Yeah, Cleveland, you blew it passing up on these 2 cats. The Browns went on to select DeShone Kizer in the 2nd round of last year's draft. They traded him earlier in the offseason to Green Bay for cornerback Demarius Randall and some draft picks. He was part of that whole 36-hour trade bonanza that the Cleveland Browns went on when they called everybody and their mama trying to make deals, and they got quite a bit done. They brought in Todd Haley as offensive coordinator. They brought him over after Pittsburgh let him go after the Jacksonville game. Todd Haley with the Steelers last year finished 3rd overall in total offense, 9th in points scored per game. So they got some juice as far as the offensive coordinator position goes. Todd Haley, he turned out to be a really good offensive coordinator. I know he started off rocky in Pittsburgh, but once they got everything ironed out, the Steelers went on to have a really good offense. Now, if you look at the Browns win-loss record, of 0-16, you'll look and say on paper, like, man, this team's terrible. There's no way they can turn this team around. There's no way they can have a drastic turnaround from one year to the next. But me personally, I feel like you would be wrong if you were to say that, because the Browns, they were competitive in several of their losses last season. 6 of their losses were within a touchdown in 2017. Cleveland added Tyrod Taylor and drafted Baker Mayfield #1 overall, so that's another question that's going to come up for the Cleveland Browns. Who's going to be their quarterback? Because Tyrod Taylor, he comes in with some juice and some fire in his belly because he's ticked about the way things went down between him and the Buffalo Bills, and rightfully so. I would be upset as well. So, he comes in wanting to prove that he is a really good NFL quarterback. He wants to prove that the Buffalo Bills made a mistake in getting rid of him. Well, Baker Mayfield, he comes in wanting to prove that he's worthy of this #1 pick. And teams don't draft quarterbacks #1 overall to sit them on the bench very long. Those days are gone in the NFL. And don't forget, the Browns, they still have A.J. McCarron as well in the quarterback room. So the quarterback competition in Cleveland is going to be an interesting one. Who's going to be the guy? Who's going to be the field general for the Cleveland Browns in 2018? The Browns, they got a decent offensive line. They've still got a decent rushing attack. They still got Duke Johnson, who was their only running back on the roster and under contract when the offseason started. Well, they added Carlos Hyde in free agency. Then they go and they draft Nick Chubb in the second round. So the Cleveland Browns offense stacking up to be a pretty formidable unit in 2018. We ain't even talked about the receivers yet. Now, that's another big storyline for the Cleveland Browns is the receiving unit. They got Josh Gordon. They have Jarvis Landry, Corey Coleman. Josh Gordon made headlines last week when he said he felt like the Cleveland Browns have the best wide receiver core in the league. Now, I'm not ready to say that because you still have Pittsburgh. You got Antonio Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, James Jones as the tight end. You still have Minnesota with Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, Kyle Rudolph. You still have Julio Jones and Mohamed Sanu over in Atlanta. You still have DeAndre Hopkins and his squad holding it down in Houston. So I'm not ready to say that they're the best wide receiver core in the National Football League, but they definitely have the potential to be the best. And I won't say that they're the best wide receiver core in the league, but I could definitely settle for top 5. Now that's not unreasonable to say that. Now, Josh Gordon alone is another big storyline for the Cleveland Browns because he's been plagued most of the last 3 years with suspensions because he can't stay off the weed. But Josh Gordon, when this dude is on, Josh Gordon is on. Josh Gordon is one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League when he's on the field, without a doubt. He only played in 5 games last season, but he racked up 335 yards on 18 catches and 1 touchdown. Now, at first look, those numbers don't really sound like much, but when you consider the fact that he sat out most of the last 3 years on suspensions and he still showed big playability after missing so much time, I mean, it's kind of hard to doubt Josh Gordon's ability and talent. Now, the biggest thing there, the biggest storyline there, the biggest question, I should say there is, can he straighten up and show his full potential for a full season? That's the biggest question as far as Josh Gordon and the Cleveland Browns wide receiver core go. Because we know Jarvis Landry's going to put up numbers. Corey Coleman, don't really know a whole lot about him, but from everything I've read, really good receiver. Cleveland's offense as a whole has a lot of potential, but the question is, will they be able to put it all together and make some noise? That's the biggest question for the Cleveland Browns as far as their offense goes. Now, the Browns, they were selected for HBO's Hard Knocks series. Well, basically, they were forced to do it because the NFL sent out the memo to the Browns and the other 6 or 7 teams that they had on the list to do it. Nobody responded because NFL coaches don't want these cameras and these microphones following their dudes around by choice. Because if you've ever dealt with an NFL team, especially on the media side, it's almost like pulling teeth sometimes to get these dudes to tell you anything. And then really, even when these teams do cooperate, if you ever listen to NFL coaches and players talk, every last one of them say a whole lot of nothing. They're all trained in coach speak and player speak to say basically the same thing. Oh, we're just out here to win and get better every day. Next man up, da-da-da-da-da. All 32 teams say the exact same thing, but for whatever reason, people can never get enough of it. So that's another thing to look for from the Cleveland Browns. They got a little Hollywood action going on over there. Now, like I said earlier, the Cleveland Browns, in my mind, they're a sleeper team in 2018. They're going to sneak up on a lot of people, and I am here for it. Also, with the Cleveland Browns, they've got Arlington Martin product Myles Garrett, who's coming into his second year. Now, Arlington Martin has a special place in my heart because I did some media work last year with Arlington Martin, and I just called up Coach Bob Wager, told him what I was trying to do, wasn't trying to be paid. I just wanted to volunteer and get some experience in. He welcomed me with open arms. So Arlington Martin has a special place in my heart, and as a result, I am looking forward to seeing Myles Garrett build on his rookie year, which was a really good season for a rookie. Myles Garrett played in 11 games, had 7 sacks in 2017. So I'm looking forward to seeing how he builds off of that. Myles Garrett, in some people's mind, he reminds a lot of people of Von Miller, Khalil Mack type ability. So I'm looking forward to seeing if he's going to build on that in 2018. The biggest storyline / biggest question for me for the sleeper team that is the Cleveland Browns: how many games will the Browns win in 2018? Now, these next two squads in the AFC North, they've got one of the most heated rivalries in football history. And I'm not even sure where the heat and the hatred between these two squads comes from, but for whatever reason, this is one football rivalry that is literally hot as fish grease. I mean, some of these games, I haven't seen every game that these two teams have played, obviously, but this rivalry right here, man, I mean, the times that I've seen these two squads go at it, I mean, it is one of the hardest hitting, smash mouth football games that I've seen. There's been times where bones have been broken between these two teams. The crackback blocks of Hines Ward, or the time where Haloti Ngata broke Ben Roethlisberger's nose, or the big-time thunderous sack by Bart Scott that knocked the breath out of Ben Roethlisberger. I still remember seeing that sack where Bart Scott literally put his head in Ben Roethlisberger's chest and just took him to the ground. It's one of the hardest hitting, purest sacks I have ever seen in a football game. That is a sack. If you go back and look it up on YouTube, that's how you sack a quarterback. That's like that time when Elvis Dumervil sacked Tom Brady and decleated him. That's the way that you hit a quarterback. But, you know, to be honest, like I said earlier, I'm not even sure where the heat in this rivalry comes from, because me personally, I would think that the Cleveland-Baltimore rivalry would be more heated because the Ravens were born because Art Modell moved the team from Cleveland to Baltimore. So, you know, just by that alone, I would feel like that rivalry would be more heated because the fans were devastated and ticked off when that happened, and rightfully so. I mean, the one thing that I hate is to see these billionaire owners who in some cases have more money than a third world country alone. I hate to see these dudes get mad and then just pack up their ball and go home just because, you know, just because they get mad at something that the city does, or because they get mad because they can't get a new stadium, or for whatever the reason is. I hate to see these guys do that because you're taking it out on the fans, and the fans are the ones that got you to where you are. But that's another story for another day. I'm not even going to get down on that track. Anyway, 2018 will be no different between these two squads, and I am here for it. The Baltimore Ravens finished 9-7 in 2017, finished second in the division. They were knocked out of the playoffs in that crazy end to that Week 17 game against the Cincinnati Bengals. The biggest storyline / question for the Baltimore Ravens: is this the end of the John Harbaugh, Joe Flacco era in Baltimore? John Harbaugh and Joe Flacco have combined for 92 regular season wins, 6 playoff seasons, 1 Super Bowl title over the last 10 years. And I still remember how they won that Super Bowl because they got there when they came through Denver in a game that still ticks me off to this day, when Joe Flacco hit Jacoby Jones on that 70-yard Hail Mary, when all Raheem Moore had to do was just take the right angle on the ball, knock the ball down, and the Broncos would have got out of there with a win. But instead, the doggone Baltimore Ravens take the game into double overtime, win the game on a field goal, and then they go on to win the Super Bowl that season. Yes, I'm still ticked off about that game, and yes, that game still brings up bad memories to this day, 6 years later in 2018. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. Both of these dudes are under heavy pressure to get back to winning. Ravens owner Steve Bisciotti said he considered firing John Harbaugh after the 3rd straight year with no playoffs. Baltimore goes and drafts Lamar Jackson, who has great promise and great potential and a high ceiling. There's already reports coming out that, you know, now it's just minicamp, so you can't get too carried away from it. Everybody's optimistic this time of year in minicamps and OTAs and things like that. But there's already reports of everybody being enamored with Lamar Jackson's athletic ability in Baltimore. Well, everybody except Joe Flacco, of course, because it's not unreasonable to say that Lamar Jackson will possibly be the Baltimore Ravens starting quarterback in 2019. And depending on how things go in 2018, if the wheels fall off the train before the season's over, there's a chance you could see him under center before 2018 is up. This is General Manager Ozzie Newsome's last year in Baltimore, so depending on how things go come playoff time, the Ravens could have a completely different look at general manager, coach, and quarterback come 2019. Lamar Jackson alone provides great storylines. There were so many questions about Jackson coming in to the draft and combine time from executives and experts across the league for some unknown reason. A lot of people were looking at this guy as a receiver, not even giving him a chance to come in and show what he could do at quarterback. You know, after the big four quarterbacks that a lot of people were looking at on their big boards, Baker Mayfield, Josh Rosen, Josh Allen, and Sam Darnold, it was like people forgot that Lamar Jackson was even at the combine as a quarterback. I mean, that's all you heard when it came to quarterback was these four guys. You know, very, very few people counted this guy in when it came to looking at quarterbacks around that time. Dean Pease, he retired as the defensive coordinator, and John Harbaugh promoted Don Martindale up from the linebacker coach. Now that situation right there was fishy because Dean Pease, quote unquote, retires as the defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens, and then less than a month later, he's the defensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans. So it kind of begs the question, did Dean Pease really retire, or was he forced out of the defensive coordinator position by somebody from the top? Things that make you go, Anyway, C.J. Mosley, he's gone to 3 Pro Bowls under Don Martindale's instruction. So a lot of potential there for the Baltimore Ravens at the defensive coordinator spot. Marty Morningwig, he's returning as the offensive coordinator. Now, the offense started kind of slow last year, but they hit their stride after the bye week. Things started picking up. They started picking up first downs. They started scoring points. They finished 27th in total offense, 29th in passing, 11th in rushing, 9th in points scored per game. They only committed 17 giveaways, which was tied for 7th best in the National Football League. So with Marty Morningwig staying, this gives the offense more continuity to build on going into 2018. John Harbaugh, he only made the one coaching change at defensive coordinator. So the biggest question for the Baltimore Ravens, will more of the same turn into a playoff appearance for the Ravens in 2018, or is it a recipe for disaster? Last squad up in the AFC North, the second part to this Steelers-Ravens rivalry is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Fun fact for the Steelers, they've got 5 primetime games in 2018, so definitely a team that, well, the networks seem to love. They went 13-3 in 2017. The Pittsburgh Steelers are tied for the 25th easiest schedule in 2018, according to CBSSports.com. Ben Roethlisberger, he's coming into his 15th year in the NFL. So, you know, there's got to be some questions surrounding him. The team, they went and they drafted Mason Rudolph in the 3rd round. Will this be Ben Roethlisberger's last year in black and yellow? It's not an unreasonable question at this point. This dude has floated the possibility of retirement the last few years. And, you know, with Ben Roethlisberger, you can never really tell what he's doing because he's known for these antics of blowing things out of proportion. And you've heard some people call him a diva when it comes to, you know, giving storylines and headlines out for the media. He loves to get the media talking with this kind of thing. So you can never really tell what is going through the mind of Ben Roethlisberger. Is he being for real, or is he just trying to get the media buzzing? So that's one thing that, you know, remains to be seen. But whatever the case is, seems like the Steelers might be taking him serious because they go and they draft Mason Rudolph in the 3rd round, which obviously didn't rub Ben Roethlisberger the right way. He was ticked off about that whole thing, which I didn't understand because you float the possibility of retiring every year. So what is the team supposed to do? And then on top of that, even without Ben Roethlisberger floating the possibility of retirement, Ben Roethlisberger is coming into his 15th year. Ben Roethlisberger is a big dude. He's one of the hardest, if not the hardest, quarterbacks to bring down. Dudes have to hit this dude as hard as possible to even get him on the ground. And then if he won't go down, I mean, you've seen the clips of multiple defenders, you know, gang tackling this guy just to get him on the ground. So, you know, when you're a big guy like that and you accumulate those kinds of hits, and Ben Roethlisberger, he's had his share of concussions. So when you factor in all of that, the Steelers would be almost insane to not look at the future at the quarterback position. Le'Veon Bell, he's still going back and forth with the team over his contract. Now, this situation right here, I really don't understand what Le'Veon Bell is doing because on one hand, he's mad at the team for wanting to franchise him and everything, which I get. Players don't like the franchise tag. They want that long-term security. I get that. If I was a player, I would want long-term security as well. But you're mad about the team offering you the franchise tag. But then when Pittsburgh went and offered him a long-term contract that would have made him the highest paid running back in NFL history, this dude turned it down. Like, dude, what are you doing? You turned down a contract that would have made you the highest paid running back in NFL history, and then you're mad because you still don't have the contract in front of you that you like? Like, bruh, I don't understand it. I don't get it. Le'Veon Bell, he's mad at the team. He's talking about holding out, and then he's playing the victim in this whole situation. He's making these rap songs, basically trying to make the team look bad and this and that and the other. And hey, look, I'm all for a player getting his money. Get your money, bruh, because at the end of the day, these players don't know when their career is going to end. Your career could be over on any given snap, as the Steelers saw firsthand with Ryan Shazier last season. Your career could either end on one snap or it could be up in the air on one snap. So, at the end of the day, man, get your money. Get all the money that you can get. Get that financial security. I get it. I'm 100% on board with it. But at the same time, don't go out and say the team's not taking care of you or the team's not trying to do this, the team's not trying to do that. Then when they offer you this big contract and you turn it down, because then you look like a fool. And, to me, Le'Veon Bell is really kind of starting to make himself look bad in this entire situation. But anyway, now from a talent standpoint, the Steelers, they lost James Harrison. Well, of course, we all know what happened there. They let him go before the season was over. He goes and signs with New England. And then he just retired a few weeks ago. So they lose James Harrison, William Gay, Mike Mitchell, Robert Golden, J.J. Wilcox, Ryan Shazier to that horrific injury, Martavis Bryant in a trade to the Raiders. Now, they traded Martavis Bryant for a third-round pick. Martavis Bryant was a talented wide receiver, but he had drug issues, and it was no secret that he wanted out of Pittsburgh. So my question there is, how will Pittsburgh replace his speed and his ability to take the top off of the defense? Because if there was nothing else that Martavis Bryant was good at, it was getting those safeties to really pay attention, which really helped Antonio Brown and the rest of the offense eat. Now, to show you how much Martavis Bryant helped the Steelers' offense, with Martavis Bryant in the lineup, Antonio Brown averaged 1,688 yards in 3 seasons. In 2016, the one full season that Martavis Bryant had to sit out due to a suspension, Antonio Brown averaged 1,284 yards of offense. Now, make no mistake, Antonio Brown, he's going to eat. Antonio Brown's going to get his numbers regardless, because that dude, he might just be the number one receiver in the NFL right now. But a guy like Martavis Bryant really helped elevate his numbers. That just goes to show that a guy like Martavis Bryant, with his talent and his athletic ability, that goes to show how much of an effect he had on the opposing defense. So there's that. Then what will Juju Smith-Schuster look like in his second season? In 2017, he had 80 targets, 58 receptions, 917 yards, 15.8 yards per catch average, and 7 touchdowns in his rookie season. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what Juju does with that and builds on that rookie success that he had. Another question, how will they replace defensive leader Ryan Shazier? He suffered that spinal injury in December, which we all remember. Now, he's made a remarkable recovery. Ryan Shazier is walking again with the aid of a cane, but, it's just to see him walking. He walked out on the stage at the NFL draft, and just to see him walking, really, it was a great thing. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It's a remarkable recovery after seeing the kind of injury that he suffered. Remains to be seen what's going to happen with Ryan Shazier. I hope he makes a 100% full recovery. Randy Fichtner, he takes over the Steelers offense. Todd Haley, of course, we talked about him earlier. He was fired. He was let go after Pittsburgh's loss to Jacksonville in the divisional round. He serves as the offensive coordinator now over in Cleveland. Now, historically, Pittsburgh's always been known for those gritty, rough, tough, smash-mouth defenses. The Steel Curtain from back in the 70s and guys like Troy Polamalu, defensive leaders that were holding it down. Troy Polamalu, James Harrison, Larry Foote. I'm missing, I'm missing several others. Charge it to my head, not my heart. But Pittsburgh is a team that's been known historically for great defense, and, they hit that defensive slump over the last few years, but actually last year they ranked 5th in overall defense, so it seems like Pittsburgh is kind of starting to build on that defensive philosophy once again. So that's another storyline for me with the Pittsburgh Steelers. What will that defense look like coming into 2018? Will they continue to build off that 2017 success, or will they kind of regress and kind of take a few steps back and look kind of like the Pittsburgh defense that we've seen over the last few seasons? So as you can see, division-wide, a lot of great storylines coming out of the AFC North in 2018. I'm not going to do any predictions or anything like that, but, to me, after looking at everything, or after doing all the research for this particular podcast and looking at all the different moving parts that was going on with each one of these teams, this is one of those things where I would not be surprised to see either one of these teams come out as the division winners. Yes, even the Cleveland Browns, because I believe in what the Cleveland Browns are doing. They may not win the division this year. Now realistically, I don't think the Browns are going to win the division this year, but it would not surprise me to see it, because this division really does look like it could be a toss-up between these 4 squads. Well, that's my time for this episode of the Undrafted Podcast. Thank you to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for blessing me with the gifts, talents, and resources to be able to do this podcast. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to come and hang out with me on the Undrafted Podcast. Your support means the absolute world to me. Don't forget, you can follow the Undrafted Podcast on Instagram at the Undrafted Podcast or on Twitter at the Undrafted Pod. And remember, do your best and let God handle the rest. Be blessed.